For as long as you can remember, you have been living in a state of permanent crisis. Financial crisis, energy crisis, food crisis, geopolitical crisis. We are bombarded by this word every single day. It has become the white noise of modern existence. A permanent scarecrow designed to keep your mind in a state of constant, paralyzing anxiety. Today, when we hear the word crisis, our minds instantly default to disaster. We think of a dead end, of economic collapse, of something unavoidable. We are conditioned to believe that a crisis is some external monster, something that happens to us, which we must endure with our heads down, waiting for someone else to fix it. But we have been lied to. The way modern society uses this word is a form of psychological terrorism. In its original, pure Greek meaning, a crisis is not a disaster, it is a crossroads. It is the exact moment you are called to judge, to separate the truth from the lie, and to make a definitive choice. Today we are going to strip away the propaganda and reclaim a word that has been weaponized against us. We will look at how the word crisis is used to paralyze our mind, and how it connects to the ancient choice of Hercules, and how understanding its true etymological depth, alongside Plato's vision of the human soul, can restore your power to stand krateos, mighty and free, in a world built on manufactured fear. The geometry of the crossroads. Let's look at the anatomy of the word. Crisis, krisis in Greek. It originates from the verb Krinο, and Krinο does not mean to suffer or to panic. It means to be able to separate, to filter, to distinguish the real from the fake. It is the active engagement of your intellect to pull apart a chaotic mess, evaluate it, and find the truth. In ancient Greece, a crisis was never an endless, muddy swamp. It was a precise, acute moment of truth. In a court of law, the crisis was the verdict, the final judgment. In war, the crisis was the decisive battle that determined the entire outcome of the conflict. In medicine, established by Hippocrates, the crisis was the turning point of a disease, the exact day the patient's body either recovered or did not. A crisis, by its very nature, cannot last forever. It is a flashpoint, it is the moment the road splits in two. Imagine standing at that crossroads. You cannot put a tent there and camp. You cannot sleep in the middle of the street. The very nature of the crossroads demands that you look left, look right, use your judgment, and step forward. A crisis is a violent, beautiful invitation to awakening and responsibility. The choice of Hercules. This brings us to one of the most powerful archetypes of Western civilization, the choice of Hercules. Long before he became a hero, a young Hercules sat at a crossroads, completely alone, forced to make a crisis, a judgment. He was approached by two women representing two paths, but he wasn't choosing between a generic modern concept of good and evil. He was choosing between Areti, virtue, and Kakia, vice. Areti comes from the root ararisko, which means to fit perfectly, to harmonize, to join structurally. It shares the same exact root with arithmos, number, and with harmony. To the Greeks, virtue was not a moralistic sentimental goodness. It was the geometry of the soul. It meant being structurally sound and aligned with cosmic order and mentally fit. But the path of Areti was steep, rocky, and demanded intense effort and constant judgment. On the other side stood Kakia. Kakia, as Socrates analyzed in Plato's Cratylus, kakon, evil, comes from kakos ion, that which moves badly. It is a destructive, misaligned force that leads to decomposition, decay, and distortion. In the myth, Kakia appears beautifully dressed, promising Hercules ease, comfort, luxury, and zero responsibility. She tells him, "Don't choose, don't strain yourself, just let the current carry you." Kind of what we say today, go with the flow. The theft of judgment. How have we ended up living in a permanent crisis for decades? How is this even possible? How do you turn a single decisive turning point into a permanent lifestyle? This is the ultimate political trick of our time. If the system keeps you in a state of endless manufactured crisis, it effectively steals the word's true purpose. A crisis is supposed to force a decision, but a permanent crisis does the exact opposite. It paralyzes you. It becomes the structural excuse for why nothing can ever change. They tell you, "We are in a crisis, so do not question the laws. We are in a crisis, so lower your standards of living. We are in a crisis, so surrender your autonomy in exchange for mere survival." By making the emergency eternal, the average person's ability to Krinno, which is the verb of crisis, the inherent power to judge for yourself, atrophies. You stop analyzing, you stop filtering. Instead, you become a passive consumer of fear, waiting for the experts, the technocrats and your representatives to save you. Every oppressive system in human history has ruled through the calculated management of a crisis. They create the panic, they manufacture the kakos ion, the downward destructive momentum, and then they sell you the chains as a cure. But the very moment you realize that the crisis is not a dead end but a crossroads, the whole spell breaks. The imitation of thought. But here is what makes this system truly insidious. The Logistikon, our rational capacity of thinking, is not left empty. That would be too obvious. An empty mind asks questions. An empty mind will get hungry. But no, the Logistikon is filled, and it is filled carefully and systematically filled, but not with ideas, with imitations of ideas. This is the function of ideology. An ideology is not a living idea. A living idea demands that you engage with it, wrestle with it, test it against reality, and arrive at your own judgment. An ideology is something else entirely. It is an idea that has been killed, stuffed, and mounted on the wall. It hands you the conclusion without the process. It gives you the answer before you have ever asked the question. And once you have swallowed the conclusion, you feel like you are thinking, that you debate, that you argue, that you post on Facebook, that you march. But you are not thinking, you are performing a pre-recorded script. Think about the great ideological banners of modernity: communism, socialism, capitalism, equality, freedom, brotherhood. These words carry enormous emotional weight. Entire generations have lived and died for them. And yet, ask yourself a simple, almost embarrassing question. What is the first principle that moves all of them? I'm not talking about the results. I'm not talking about the promises And I'm definitely not talking about the slogans. I'm talking about the Arche, the origin, the governing principle. And notice something extraordinary about this word. Arche, the governing principle, shares the same root as Areti and the verb ararisko, to fit perfectly, to join structurally, to harmonize. The Arche is not merely the beginning in a chronological sense. It is the load-bearing principle, so to speak, the structural joint that holds everything else in place. This is why the word survives in architecture. Arche plus tekton, the master builder, the one who understands the governing structure beneath the visible form. When you ask for the arche of an ideology, you are not asking a historical question. You are asking an architectural one. What is this built on? And will it hold the weight of a human life? Who rules? By what right? According to what measure of the human soul? Communism tells you that the collective owns everything, but it never examines the nature of the men who will govern the collective. Capitalism tells you that free markets produce prosperity, but it never examines the soul of the man who is left free to accumulate without any limit. Equality tells you that all people must be equal, but equal in what? In virtue? In mediocrity? In the eyes of the law? Or in the arithmetic of outcomes? And then there is the oldest menu of all, religion. Christianity, Islam, any organized doctrine. The question here is exactly the same. What is the Arche? Who defines it? By whose authority? And most critically, have you ever actually examined the menu itself? Or did you simply inherit it? We are lost in the effects. We fight over the machinery, and we never look at the engine. This is precisely what the school system prepares you for. Not to examine first principles, but to choose a team. You are handed a menu of pre-approved ideologies, told to pick your favorite, and then trained to defend it. The question, what is the arche of this, is never asked. It is in fact structurally forbidden, because the moment you ask it, you have stepped outside the game entirely. Can you judge the curriculum? Can you judge the teacher? Can you raise your hand and say, I do not accept the premise of this lesson? You cannot. And this is not an accident. It is the design. And then there is a deeper architecture beneath all of this, one that Plato understood with terrifying clarity. In the Republic, Plato describes the human soul as having three distinct parts. The Logistikon that we mentioned before, the rational faculty, the part that judges, filters, and Krinno, again the verb, crisis, the Thymoeides, the spirited part. This is the seat of anger, of pride, and the drive for recognition, and the Epithymetikon, the engine of appetite, of pleasure, and the fear of loss. A healthy soul is one where the rational governs the other two, where judgment leads and passion and desire serve. Now, look around you. Desire is everywhere. It is abundant. It is engineered. It is infinite. From the moment we wake up, we are surrounded by carefully constructed objects of appetite, things to want, things to fear losing, things to consume before they disappear. And when you have been trained since childhood to live inside the Epithymetikon, to define yourself through your desires, something else happens beneath the surface that nobody tells you about. The Thymoeides, Your spirited faculty, your pride, your drive, gets rewired in its service. Because when a desire becomes part of your identity, the Thumos, the Thymoeides, will fight to protect it. It has to. That is its function. But now, it is no longer fighting for your honor. It is fighting for the desire. And if someone knows how to dangle the right carrot, the right fear, the right promise, the right enemy, you will run. And your Thymoeides, your rage, your passion, your courage, will serve whoever is holding that carrot. Not you, them. In this entire process, the Logistikon has quietly left the building, like Elvis. Elvis has left the building. And the most dangerous part is that you do not even notice. This is what modern media has perfected. They feed the Epithymetikon constantly, fear of losing your job, losing your savings, your health, your home, your security, raw survival panic that is looped on a 24-hour cycle. And when they are not stoking fear, they ignite the Thymoeides. They hand you an enemy, a political opponent, a foreign country, a social group, someone to hate, someone to rage against. Because a person consumed by Thumos does not stop to judge, they react. The Logistikon, the only part of you that is capable of genuine diakrisis, dia plus krisis, that means of cutting through the noise and finding the truth, is left to atrophy. And this atrophy does not begin with a news cycle, it begins far earlier. It begins in school. The educational system, as most of us have experienced it, does not develop judgment. It develops compliance. It does not ask you to Krinno, to separate, to evaluate, to decide. It asks you to memorize, to repeat, and to perform. The capacity for diakrisis is treated not as the highest human faculty, but as an inconvenience. And so, by the time you are an adult, the machinery is already in place. The Logistikon is weak, and the Epithymetikon and Thymoeides are inflamed. You are structurally the perfect consumer of manufactured crisis. And this is not because we are stupid, but because we are never given the tools to be otherwise. And this brings us to the most unsettling question a human being can ask themselves. Not which ideology is correct, not which party should I vote for, not even the question of what do I believe, but this: which of the things I think, feel, want, and ultimately do are genuinely mine, and which of them were planted? Which beliefs did I arrive at through struggle and judgment, and which were handed to me pre-assembled like furniture from a catalogue, ready to fill the empty living room of my mind? This is the question that the permanent crisis is designed to prevent. This is the question that ideology silences before it can be born. And this is exactly the question that Socrates, 25 centuries ago, sat down with a young man named Meno and refused to stop asking. The Menon, the death of the question. Menon opens with what seems like a simple question: can virtue be taught? And Socrates does something amazing. Instead of answering, he stops. He says, before we ask whether virtue can be taught, we must first ask, what is virtue? Menon is then baffled. He lists examples. Virtue for a man is this. virtue for a woman is that, virtue for a soldier is courage, virtue for a politician is governance, and so on. He gives Socrates a menu, and Socrates refuses the menu. Now, notice what is happening here. Notice the move Socrates is making. Earlier in this video, we asked a question about ideology. We said it is not enough to argue about communism versus capitalism, about equality versus freedom, about this religion or that doctrine, about this party or that party. You must go deeper. You must ask, what is the Arche? What is the first principle that moves all of this? Who rules, and by what measure of the human soul? That is exactly, word for word, move for move, what Socrates does with virtue in the Meno dialogue. Meno comes in with a menu. Virtue for a man, for a woman, for a soldier, for a politician, and so on. He is giving Socrates the results, the effects, the visible surface of the thing. And Socrates refuses. He goes back to the Arche. He asks for the structural joint, the single governing principle that makes all these instances of virtue instances of the same thing. And this is not a coincidence. This is the method. This is what genuine thought looks like in any era, on any subject. You do not fight at the level of the menu. You ask who wrote the menu. This is the diakrisis in its purest form. Not the ability to choose between options on a preset menu, but the capacity to step back and examine the menu itself, to ask, who wrote this, by what authority, and according to what vision of the human soul? Meno cannot answer, and neither, Socrates gently suggests that neither can anyone who has only ever been taught what to think and never how. Because genuine knowledge, Socrates argues, is not transferred from teacher to student like cargo loaded onto a ship. It emerges. It is drawn out from within through questioning, through struggle, through the painful, beautiful process of Krinno, of crisis. This is why he describes himself not as a teacher but as a midwife. He does not plant the answer, he assists in the birth of judgment. The school system is the precise inversion of the Socratic method. It does not assist in the birth of judgment, it performs a caesarean, removes the child before it is ready, and hands you a pre-packaged conclusion, and it calls it an education. And so we return to the crisis. When the word crisis flashes across our screen, we are being given a menu, a pre-approved list of reactions: fear, anger, tribal loyalty, the appetite for safety at any cost. What you are never offered, what has been systematically trained out of us since our childhood, is the capacity to stop, step back and ask, what is the Arche of this crisis? Who benefits from my panic? By what principle am I being governed and by whom? That question is diakrisis. That question is the very crossroads. And that question is the one thing that permanent crisis is designed to prevent you from ever asking. We are indeed at a turning point, but the real disaster is not the fluctuating economy, the shifting geopolitics, or the chaos on the news. The real disaster is our own self-inflicted paralysis. The next time you open your laptop, look at your phone, or turn on the news and see the word crisis with capital letters flashed in a giant red letters, change your perspective. Do not look at it as a threat. Look at it as an ultimatum. The system is screaming at you that the road has ended. History, however, will whisper to you that you are simply standing at the crossroads of Hercules. It is time to step out of the false comfort of our isolation. It is time to clear out the psychological noise of fear and to start judging the world around us with absolute ruthless clarity. We need to stop asking which ideology will save us. We need to stop asking which party, which doctrine, which system will save us. And we need to start asking what the Arche is. Who rules? By what right? According to what measure of the human soul? And ask yourself right now, which of your fears, your certainties, your loyalties, your outrage is genuinely yours? And which of it was placed there carefully by someone who knew exactly which carrot to dangle? Are we going to remain passive spectators watching our lives managed by proxies under the guise of a permanent emergency? Or are we going to reclaim our judgment, our Logistikon, step back from the menu and start asking the question they never wanted us to ask? The crossroads is right here, in front of you, in front of me, in front of all of us. The crisis is not asking for your fear, it is demanding your verdict. We need to stop fearing the turning point. We need to master it. Think about it. Oh, before I go, I almost forgot to ask you something. You've heard the word idea your entire life. You've had ideas, you've fought for ideas, you've been given ideas. But do you know where the word actually comes from? The word idea, ιδέα, comes from the verb orao, which means to see, to perceive directly. And here is where it gets interesting. The word for I know is Oida, and it is the same root, it is the same verb, which means that in ancient Greek thought, to know something and to have seen something are the exact same thing. You don't say I know, you say I have seen. An idea, in its original meaning, is not something you think, it is something you see. Which means, and sit with this for a moment, what they have been giving you your entire life, through school, through media, through ideology, through doctrine, those were never ideas. You cannot see a prepackaged conclusion, you can only consume it. A real idea is what happens when the Logistikon is finally awake, when the Logistikon becomes pure consciousness and is finally free and finally looking directly at reality without any filter. So let me leave you with a question for next time. When was the last time you didn't just think, but actually saw? Think about it.